The sun hung low over the city skyline, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The sounds of honking horns and distant laughter filled the air as people bustled about their lives. In a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta, where buildings stood tall but dreams felt small, a boy named Jordan dribbled a worn-out basketball on the street corner. Jordan was 13, thin as a rail but fast on his feet. His clothes were a size too big, and his sneakers, if they could still be called that, were barely holding together. The soles had holes, the laces were different colors, and the grip was long gone. But none of that mattered to him. Basketball was his escape, his dream, his everything. Every afternoon, after finishing up at the community center where his mother worked as a cleaner, Jordan would rush to the local park. The hoop had no net, and the backboard was covered in graffiti. But it was the only court he had. He practiced alone, perfecting his shot, his dribble, his footwork. He wanted to be great. He needed to be great. One evening, as the golden light of sunset bathed the court, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up nearby. Jordan, sweating from his drills, glanced at it briefly before turning his attention back to the game. Then, the car door opened, and out stepped a towering figure. Shaquille O'Neal, the big diesel himself. The kids at the park stopped what they were doing. Some gasped. Others ran to the fence to get a closer look. Shaq, in a crisp tracksuit and a pair of massive sneakers, smiled and waved. "Yo, is that really Shaq?" someone whispered. "It's him, bro," another kid said, eyes wide. Jordan's heart pounded. He had seen Shaq on TV, in commercials, even in movies. But here, in his neighborhood, it didn't feel real. Shaq walked toward the court, his steps slow and easy. His presence alone was enough to make the entire park feel smaller. He scanned the area, then nodded approvingly. "I like this spot," Shaq said, his deep voice rolling over the crowd. "Got history in places like this." One of the older boys, Marcus, nudged Jordan forward. "Go on, man," he whispered. "Say something." Jordan swallowed his nerves. He dribbled the ball twice, then looked up at Shaq. "You play?" he asked. Shaq chuckled, hands on his hips. "You asking me if I play?" Jordan grinned. "Yeah? You any good?" The crowd laughed, and Shaq let out a booming chuckle. "I think I did all right back in the day," he said. Then he pointed at Jordan's shoes, or what was left of them. "You ballin' in those." Jordan's face burned. He glanced at his feet, scuffed and torn. "Yeah," he muttered. Shaq nodded, his expression turning serious. "Tell you what, little man, I'll make you a deal. If you can beat me in a one-on-one game, I'll buy you the best pair of sneakers you've ever seen." The park erupted in cheers. Jordan's stomach twisted. He wanted those shoes, needed them, but how could he beat someone like Shaq? Still, pride pushed him forward. "All right," he said, "but if I win, you gotta do something else for me." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yeah? What's that?" Jordan hesitated for a second, then spoke. "You gotta come back, not just for today. You gotta help us. Help kids like me." Shaq studied him, the smile on his face softening. Then he nodded. "All right, young blood. You got yourself a deal." The game was set. The sun dipped lower as the crowd gathered around the court. The air buzzed with excitement. Jordan stood on one side, bouncing the ball, his mind racing. He had played against kids bigger than him before, but never against a giant. Shaq stepped onto the court, moving with the ease of someone who had spent his entire life on the hardwood. "First to 5, he said. "Make it, take it." Jordan nodded. The ball felt heavy in his hands, as he took his first dribble. He had speed on his side. He had to use it. He faked left, then darted right, slipping past Shaq's massive frame. He leapt for a layup, and for a second, he thought he had it. But then, a shadow fell over him. A giant hand swatted the ball out of the air, sending it bouncing toward the fence. The crowd groaned. Jordan landed awkwardly, staring at Shaq in disbelief. Shaq shrugged. "Welcome to the big leagues." Jordan retrieved the ball, his heart pounding. He wasn't going to let this be easy. This time, he tried a step-back jumper. The ball arched high, but clanged off the rim. Shaq grabbed the rebound with one hand and, without even trying, dunked it. The court shook. The crowd lost it. Jordan wiped his forehead. He was down 1-0. He needed to change his strategy. He used his speed again, weaving through, pulling up for a jumper. This time, the ball swished through the net. 1-1, someone shouted. The game continued, back and forth. Jordan pushed himself harder than he ever had. He managed another bucket, then another. It was 4-3, with Jordan leading. But Shaq wasn't done. He powered through, using his size to his advantage. Before Jordan knew it, the score was tied, 4-4. Next point wins. Jordan's chest heaved. His legs burned. He dribbled, eyes locked on Shaq. Then he took off toward the hoop. He faked one way, spun the other, and jumped. For a split second, he thought he had done it. Then Shaq blocked him again. Hard. The ball flew out of bounds. The game was over. Shaq had won. Jordan dropped to his knees, hands on his thighs. His breath came in ragged gasps. He had lost. He wouldn't get the shoes. He wouldn't. A massive hand landed on his shoulder. "Get up, little man," Shaq said. Jordan looked up. Shaq was smiling. "You played your heart out. That's all that matters." Jordan stood slowly. The crowd clapped, some even cheering his name. He had lost, but he had earned their respect. Shaq bent down, looking him in the eye. "And you know what?" Jordan wiped his face. "What?" Shaq grinned. "A deal's a deal." Jordan blinked. "But I lost." Shaq stood up straight and turned to the crowd. "I'll be back," he said, his voice carrying through the park. "Not just for today. We're going to do something real here. Something big." The kids cheered. Jordan's eyes widened. He had lost the game. But somehow, he had won something even bigger. That night, Jordan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His heart was still racing. But this time, not from the game. He had no idea what Shaq had planned. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something new. Hope. True to his word, Shaq came back. But he didn't just bring new sneakers. He brought something much bigger. A vision. The very next weekend, Shaq returned to the park with a team. Architects, construction workers, and community leaders gathered as he laid out his plan. He wasn't just donating shoes. He was building something permanent. A basketball center for the kids. Jordan could hardly believe it. He stood near the back of the growing crowd, listening as Shaq explained his idea. "Every kid deserves a place to play, to dream, to grow," Shaq said. "That's why we're building a brand new basketball court. Not just any court, but a full facility where kids can train, hang out, and be safe." The crowd erupted in cheers. Construction started almost immediately. Within weeks, the old cracked pavement was ripped up. The backboard that had once been covered in graffiti was replaced with a brand new glass one. Instead of just one hoop, there were now multiple courts, each with proper flooring and lights for evening games. Inside the facility, there would be classrooms, mentoring programs, and training sessions run by coaches. Shaq had thought of everything. Jordan was there every day, watching the transformation. He had never seen anything like it. "This is because of you," Shaq told him one day as they stood by the construction site. "You had the heart to challenge me. Now, I challenge you to use this place to help other kids like you." When the basketball center finally opened, the entire neighborhood showed up. It was a celebration like no other. Kids who had never owned a decent pair of shoes got new gear. Coaches signed up to volunteer. Local businesses pitched in with funding for programs. And standing at the center of it all was Jordan, looking up at Shaq with admiration. As the sun set on the first full day of games at the new center, Shaq put a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "This is your court now, little man," he said. "Make it count." And with that, Jordan laced up his brand-new sneakers and stepped onto the court, knowing that his life and the lives of so many others had just changed forever.